I don't think it comes as any surprise that I love beer, from the aroma and flavor to the way it makes me feel, which I have no qualms admitting. Also, as a bit of a history nerd, I love thinking about the fact that people thousands of years ago were drinking versions of the stuff that we sip from cans, bottles, and pint glasses today. All of it is just so cool to me. It's why I'm still here doing this thing today. Now, as much as I love beer in general, there are naturally some styles I like more than others, as well as some I don't really like that much at all. While I've not necessarily refrained from sharing these opinions publicly in the past, I am going to be a bit more overt today. You're listening to the Brülosophy Podcast. I'm your host, Marshall Schott, and the topic for this Brews Views episode is beer styles we hate. Yes, I know, hate's a strong word. That's going to come up a few more times throughout this episode, but this is show business, baby, and a little bit of clickbait never hurt anybody. So either way, as we've made a habit of doing over the last year, we asked our patrons what their most hated beer styles are, and I'll be sharing those with you today. Shockingly, we received over 4 times more responses to this question than ever before, so we'll just have to see how this goes. I'm also going to share the most hated beer styles of the other Brülosophy contributors, who all happen to be busy this week. So for the first time ever, I will be doing an entire episode by myself, meaning I am fully responsible for anything that goes awry. Now, just a reminder, this is a Brews Views episode where we allow ourselves to, let loose a little bit more than usual and use language that some people may or may not like. We might share opinions you disagree with. That's sort of the point of this series. So if you're not into that, consider yourself warned. Feel free to skip this episode altogether. All right, if you're a fan of this show and you'd like to receive a reward for your support, please consider becoming a patron of Brülosophy over at patreon.com/Brülosophy, where you make a small pledge and receive rewards like access to unpublished contributor recipes, unique perks from YakimaValleyHops.com, and an invitation to a monthly live brew day with a Brülosophy contributor, as well as inclusion in episodes like this and our Brew and A episodes. You can learn more about all of the rewards we offer for your support over at patreon.com/Brülosophy. Huge ups to all of our patrons for allowing us to do this thing that we love doing so much. Another really easy way to support us is by using the links found at brülosophy.com/support when you're shopping online. Your experience doesn't change at all, and we get a little kickback for the referral that does help us to cover the costs of running all of this stuff. Finally, if you wouldn't mind leaving a rating and review of this show in Apple Podcast or wherever it is you listen to podcasts, that would be awesome too. It seems like once we cracked that 1,000 review threshold in Apple, people stopped thinking that it mattered. It still matters. If you are listening on Apple Podcast, if you're listening in Spotify, you can go in there, rate and review us, and it helps us immensely. So if you could take the 2 seconds to do that, again, we really would appreciate it. Feedback is brought to you by Clawhammer Supply, who, in addition to having an awesome YouTube channel chock full of great brewing-related content, sell what we believe to be some of the best electric brewing systems on the market. If you've been considering making the move from propane to electric, you owe it to yourself to check out Clawhammer Supply. Whether you're after a 120-volt 5-gallon unit or something bigger like their powerful 240-volt 10-gallon system, Clawhammer has got you covered. Learn more about everything they have to offer at clawhammersupply.com, and don't forget to check out their YouTube channel as well. Listener Steven Seville wrote in to share a cool international drinking experience he had. Steven said, "I'm currently heading home to London after a business trip in Toyama and Tokyo, Japan, and I thought I'd share something I don't think I've seen anywhere else. Japanese lager on draft appears to have really tight bubbles in the foam, as though it was nitro poured, yet the beer below the foam just tastes and feels like straight CO2. Lo and behold, I'm writing this from the Cathay Pacific Lounge at Tokyo Haneda Airport, and they have a draft serving machine for a lager called Kirin. It has 2 taps, the first one to dispense the beer and a second one for the extra nitro," he asks, foam. I hope you appreciate this level of geekiness as much as I do. Now, Steven did share a video of this dual pour contraption, and let me just say, I definitely appreciate the geekiness. I have actually seen this myself in the States at a specialty bar pouring Kirin. So I really love Kirin. I love international pale lager, particularly those that come from Japan. It's an absolutely excellent style to me. I have never had one that had that extra pour of foam on the top. And yeah, I'm not sure I would say that it's worth investing in that. I'm not convinced that it adds that much to the drinking experience, but if you're a specialty bar and you have access to that kind of machinery, why not? What a cool thing to have available for your patrons. Just to add that extra dose of experience to the process of drinking what is, in my opinion, an absolutely delicious lager. Now, again, does it have a big organoleptic impact? on the beer. I guess that's for another episode. Of course, I'm not going to get too deep into that. I absolutely believe that foam is important. I'm not sure the construct of that foam and the way it's presented matters as much as the way that beer is carbonated or nitrogenated, if you will. So those are my thoughts on that. But I love the fact that you got to experience that, Stephen. It's such a cool thing to witness if you're a beer geek like us, and more power to the Kieran folks for really pushing that way of serving that delicious beer. Thanks so much for writing in, Stephen. We really do appreciate hearing cool stories like this. If you've got a story or feedback you'd like for us to address on the show, you could send it to feedback@brulosophy.com or leave us a note on social media. Be sure to pick up your Brülosophy merch over at brulosophy.com/shop. We are offering more options than we ever have before, from t-shirts, hoodies, and hats to fanny packs, shorts, coffee mugs, tank tops, mobile phone cases, stickers, and so many other things. We've done our best to keep prices as low as possible, and international shipping is now available. Again, you can head to brulosophy.com/shop and click one of the product images on that page, which will redirect you to our general Dashery store, or you can just go directly there at brulosophy.dashery.com. We've also put a link to the description to that website in the description of this episode.
Imagine you're a business owner relying on a dozen different software programs. Each one is expensive, overly complicated, and worst of all, none of them are connected. It can be incredibly stressful, right? Now, picture Odoo. CRM, accounting, inventory, manufacturing, marketing, HR, and more. Odoo brings all the tools your business needs into one simple platform, and all seamlessly connected. Everything works together, giving you the peace of mind that your business is running smoothly from every angle. Odoo's open source applications are user-friendly and designed to scale with your business, saving you time and money. Say goodbye to juggling multiple platforms and hello to efficient integrated management. Stop wasting resources on complicated systems and make the switch to Odoo today. Visit odoo.com, ODOO.com, and discover how Odoo can simplify and streamline your business operations. Odoo, modern management made simple.
There's no denying that stainless steel is the best material for brewing equipment, and Delta Brewing Systems offers some of the lowest prices on high-quality stainless gear, like the Firm Tank, which in addition to holding 8 gallons or 30 liters of work, comes with a domed lid to even further reduce the chances of a messy blow-off. Plus, it can hold up to 4 psi of pressure for closed transfers. Delta Brewing Systems also has their own line of brew kettles, as well as one of the lowest-priced all-in-one electric brewing systems out there, and their prices are shockingly low. If you're in the market for legit stainless gear that won't break the bank, do yourself a favor and head over to deltabrewingsystems.com today.
I have no clue how many times I've received an email or seen a social media post from someone calling me out for my hatred of hazy IPA, but it has been a lot, let me tell you, and I've done my best to dispel this myth on the show. I'll just say it again, hazy IPA, while not my preferred style of IPA, it's not even on my list of hated styles, at least when they're done right. Serve me an oxidized version, absolutely. I'm not going to finish the pint. I'll talk shit on it. But that's sort of the case for most styles for me. I like well-made and cared for beer and will drink mostly any style. Mostly. Now, for this Brews Views episode, we received over 40 responses from patrons in a matter of just 24 hours. And thankfully, we asked that they share just the one style they hate the most or like the least with a brief reason why. So this shouldn't be too long. I also got similar responses from some of the AWOL Brülosophy contributors that I'll be sharing. Again, they all had obligations this weekend, but I didn't feel like skipping an episode and had the time. So here we are. Real quick, we included every comment that was there on our Patreon question at the time of recording this episode. So if you left one and I don't mention it, I do apologize. It's entirely because of timing. We record these episodes up to a week before they are dropped. All right, let's get into it. We're going to start with Brülosophy contributor Will Lovell, who says, I really don't like wheat beers. It's mostly a mouthfeel thing with the way wheat presents on the palate, but throw in banana and bubblegum flavor and it's a hard pass for me. I can tolerate a good Dunkelweiss as they tend to favor clove over the other flavors, but the rich malt character gets completely overshadowed by the mouthfeel. I guess mouthfeel is the biggest issue I have with hazy IPA as well. Well, Will and I talk often, obviously. We're on the show together. I can't say that I fully agree with wheat beers as a kind of an umbrella term. Weiss beer, I will drink all day. Not all day. I will drink it as the day is long, as they say. But it's not that I love it. It's not that I hate it. It's just one of those kind of middle ground beers for me. If a friend made one, I will not turn down a pint after pint. It doesn't bother me. But I absolutely love American wheat beer. And those are both wheat beers that taste phenomenally different. If you don't think that you've had an American wheat beer, go grab something like a Widmer Brothers Hefeweizen. That is a classic example of a commercial American wheat beer. It's clean, it's crisp, it's delicious. And I don't care what anybody says, it goes great with an orange in there. So thank you, Will. Miss you, buddy, and hope you're having a fun weekend without being on the episode here with us. The next comment comes from patron Kevin M, who says, oh, this one comes up a lot. I'll just let you know now. Smoked beer, not hate, but I dislike most smoked beers. Oddly enough, the local meadery has a session Bochet mead with a touch of smoke that is killer. I think it's mostly a heavy hand that makes them less desirable for me. Well, it didn't take very long for a patron to name one of the beers that I absolutely cannot get behind. I've talked about it on the show before. I do not like smoked beer. I've never had a Rausch beer that I enjoy. And I don't care if it's from Schlenkerla or some local craft brewery. I do not like that smoky, bacony flavor in my pint of beer. I've tried to like it. It's just so gross. What's crazy is my favorite spirit is Scotch, peaty Scotch. I love it. But to me, they're different. Now, that's not to say that I'm fully against using smoked malt in beer. A good friend of mine, one of the owners of Crone Wolf Brewing Company, Matt Human, has a delicious porter that he makes that has like 1% peated smoked malt in it. And it is an absolutely phenomenal beer. My favorite porter that I've ever had. In fact, I think it's the recipe that Brad uses at Crone Wolf, at least for inspiration, for their very good porter as well. But these heavy-handed smoked beers, I'm right there with you, Kevin, just not my thing. On the opposite end of that spectrum for my preferences is Greg Mixta, who says, American lager. I just don't understand why they can't taste better. I'm a big-time fan of Munich Helles lager and other German lagers. While in Munich at the Augustiner Keller, I first tasted their Helles and was literally blown away by the malt-forward flavors, floral, herbal hop expression, and the delicate complexity of the beer. It was Edelstoff, he says. So I guess I'm looking at American lager from the lens of Munich Helles, and I'm thinking, this is the best we can do. Certainly the macro-American breweries are 100% capable of making similar beer to their European counterparts. So what's the deal? Did they used to be good, but over time they changed their recipes? It'd be cool to taste a Budweiser from the 1920s and see what it was like. I don't know the history, Greg, of American lager, or, Bud, Miller, Coors being the main ones that we often refer to, but I couldn't disagree with you more. I'm not a big fan of Budweiser. I get kind of a sharp, appley, almost just an odd note from it that I know a lot of people will associate with acetaldehyde. But I cracked open a can of Miller Lite for the first time in about 4 days last night, sitting down just watching a TV show with my wife, and I was blown away at how delicious it was. So preferences is subjective. We talk about this all the time. Totally appreciate your opinion against American lager, but I think they're doing it right. Now, that's not to say that I like it more or think it's even in the same class as classic, continental lagers like German Pilsner and Munich Helles. If those are all in front of me, I'll drink all of them, but I'm probably going to go for the classic German lagers first. Put a Czech lager in front of me, that's taking the cake. That's not to say that I can't still appreciate American lager, though. Everybody listening to this show knows that about me, though. I'm the blasphemer who loves Miller Lite, so... Charles Meyer says pastry/slushy sour beers. I know you'll get plenty of responses saying hazy IPA, Charles says, so I'll spare that one. My real struggle is with the fruit puree, lactose-loaded, marshmallow-adjacent beers that are so thick you practically need a spoon to drink them. At some point, it stops being beer and starts feeling like a melted smoothie with carbonation. I appreciate experimentation, but when fermentation feels secondary to adjunct volume and viscosity, I'm out. If I have to chew my beer, something's gone off the rails. Charles, I don't want to get in trouble on this one. I kind of agree and disagree with you. What I love about the whole pastry, slushy, sour thing is the creativity. It's the fact that you've got brewers who are stepping outside of the norms and creating new things that some people out there who may not like the beers that you and I do, Charles, really enjoy. And I think that's rad. Now, am I going to drink a whole pint? I won't drink a whole pint of a regular smoothie. There's no way that blending it with carbonation and alcohol is going to make it any more palatable to me. It's just not my jam. But I'm not a big fan of sweets in general, so I've always just chalked it up to that. But it's my opinions about these super duper sweet, beers, whether they're sour or not, is mostly because I'm just not a fan of sweet in general. But I get where you're coming from. When breweries have these types of beers on tap, I'm never ordering one, but I will absolutely ask for a sample. And if it's good, maybe get like a taster of it, just because they're fun to drink. And that to me is good enough to qualify them as a good beer, I suppose. All right. Espen says, hazy IPA. First person who lists hazy IPA. Here we go. Espen says, I have a real love-hate relationship with hazy IPA. I think it's fantastic that there's a style for those who don't like bitter beer, but personally, I can't stand them. I've been gifted a few over the years, but I've had to give them to the missus after just a sip or two. On the same note, I think it's really good that they bring people to the breweries, but do we really need 5 different hazies on tap, especially when you only have 8 beers total? At least that's still the case in many places in Australia. I understand the U.S. seems to be moving away from them somewhat. Espen, if they're moving away from them, I haven't really noticed it. Things are a bit wonky over here with the beer industry, and so my focus has not been on what's on tap necessarily like it used to be. But I will say, locally here in town, we've got Crow and Wolf. Of course, they've got a hazy or two on tap all the time, but they really make an effort to putting in, to Brad does, brewing a variety of beer styles that you might not find at your typical, smaller craft brewery. Also, Burning Sun Brewery in town is another one that I've been there a couple of times and I'm blown away. They got a brown ale on, they've got a porter on tap, they've got a standard American pale ale made the old way, and they're killing it. So I think if you find the right place, you're not going to run into that whole a wall of hazy IPA and nothing else to choose from. I will say, while I'm not a hater of hazy IPA, it's not what I want to drink pint after pint. But I also don't want to drink pint after pint of West Coast IPA or of anything, that's north of about 6% ABV. I like variety. I like simple beers. And, as much as I love IPA, and I do, it's the same thing. I don't want to just sit and drink only stout, for a session. So I'm sort of with you in the love-hate part of it. If it's oxidized, I'm out. That's oxidized hazy IPA could probably become a style in and of itself with how much bad hazy IPA is out there. But the good ones are good, and I think they deserve the credit, and I'm saying it right. You heard it here first. Marshall does not hate hazy IPA, just the oxidized versions of it. Okay, contributor Steve Thanos says, wheat beer and hazy IPA. Already dropping 2 over here. Steve says, I'm not a big fan of wheat beers or hazy IPA. There's a sense of astringency that I detect with wheat beers that's quite off-putting to me. I also really dislike the lack of bitterness in hazy IPA, along with the mouthfeel. I think a lot of people are with Steve on the mouthfeel thing. I mean, he and Will are basically saying the same thing about hazy IPA. And that is one area that I sort of agree with. I get a chalky feeling in my mouth, and I don't care. The brewers are like, no, man, that's from this and this, and we didn't do that. And then I drink their beer, and I'm like, no, it's there, buddy. But it's not that I hate it. I think that's a quality of it that a lot of people really appreciate. Is it contributes to that kind of cloudy, soft feeling in their mouths that I don't want. My preference is crisp and sharp with a nice assertive bitterness to balance the sweetness from the malt. So I get where Steve's coming from. Again, there's a time and a place for a good hazy IPA. But the comment about wheat beer, he shares this with Will, which I think is very interesting. I think I understand where Steve's coming from with this. I wouldn't call it astringency, but there is a kind of tartness that I get in heavily wheated beer, including American wheat beer, which, like I said before, I love. I don't know what that's from in the wheat, but I like it. I think it's part of the reason wheat beers go so well with sliced citrus, is it balances that curious tartness that wheat can contribute to beer. I'm also, this is a little bit of an aside, I'm also not convinced that adding wheat to beer at like 5 to 15% of the grist has any impact whatsoever on mouthfeel or foam retention, but I know a lot of people believe it does. I've had similar results in terms of both of those qualities, mouthfeel and foam, when I go 100% barley malt and when I toss in 15% wheat. Once you start pushing that 50% wheat, though, in the grist, you do start to taste, at least I do, that kind of crispy, tart type of quality that you can get from wheat. I happen to like it. Others don't like it. That's totally fair. All right, patron Wade Wallinger says, hazy IPA. We got another hazy IPA hater here. He says, I know they're very popular, but they remind me of the gravity samples I take a swig of that have too much yeast in it. Not a hater, just not a fan, though I'll gladly accept a short taste as a free sample or when paid for by one of my friends. I just may have to chase it with a, quote, good beer, he says. Yeah, you know, I get it. Not everything is going to float everybody's boat, and that's perfectly fine. Hazy IPA is an easy one to pick on, I think, not only because it's relatively new, I mean, you know, a decade old at this point or whatever, but because it doesn't look like what we expect an IPA to look like, and it does not feel in your mouth the way we expect it to feel. I don't think it tastes like wort. I don't think it tastes like a gravity sample. I think it looks like a gravity sample, so I'm with you on that, Wade. But I'm over the vanity part of it. It's supposed to be hazy, so I'm okay with that, as long as that haze isn't from yeast. If it's from yeast, I can usually tell within a few hours after drinking the pint, and I just won't drink that hazy IPA ever again. When I've had one of my favorite, I guess, I don't even know if it qualifies technically as a hazy IPA, but one of my favorite commercial examples is Lawson's Sip of Sunshine. And to me, that is like, it's hazy, but not yeasty, and it's really good. Like, I would drink it over and over because they care about that beer. Their packaging process is sound. They're not introducing a bunch of oxygen. So, but yeah, it's that even just a touch of oxidation and that weird sickly sweet, like the inside of a lemon head, that just hard candy flavor, not my jam. All right, here's another repeat. Luke in Woodworth says, smoked beers. Sorry, Will. There was a time in my life when I was first getting into craft beer where it seemed like there were no styles I disliked. I was trying different styles for the first time, such as Belgians, sours, barley wines, and all sorts of aggressive IPAs, and absolutely loving them. Then along came my tour of Stone Brewing in San Diego. Their flight at the end of the tour included their smoked porter, and I couldn't even finish the 4-ounce pour. Needless to say, I love smoked meats and even a good peated scotch every now and then, but for some reason, I do not like smoked beers. I wonder if it's a genetic thing, Luke, and this is because I'm with you. I love smoked meat. I love barbecue. I love peated scotch. I believe it's the Highlands that are known for their kind of even more smoky scotches, and I will drink it all day. I love it. But something about the juxtaposition of smoky flavor in beer just does not hit right with me. And I have had Stone Brewing smoked porter, and I could not finish a 4-ounce pour of that if you forced me to. It is so gross. I experience a gag reflex when I sip on it. It's the same thing though with Schlenkerla Rausch beer. It's just not my thing. So yeah, I'm with you on that, Lucan. And just so all of our listeners know, this is not the last time smoked beer is going to come up. Here's one that I completely disagree with. Christian Forstall says, sours, especially enamel peeling aged lambics. I'm offended equally by the taste of the brew and fans of the style who trumpet their, quote, complexity and rarity while snobbishly sipping from a tiny tulip. If I'm gifted a glass, though, who am I to turn it down? So, couple of points on this one, Christian. I'm a weirdo. I don't like candy. I don't like sweets very much. But there's something about sour, about tart that I can get behind, particularly in beer, which is the exact opposite for smoked beer if you think about it. I love smoky foods. I do not like smoky beer. Not a big fan of sour candy, but I'm a big fan of sour beer, even when it's like punch you in the face. Now, that's not to say I'm going to sit and drink tulip after tulip of a complex, rare, highly acidic beer, but I will absolutely enjoy it, which, again, preference, totally up to you, up to me to choose our own. I don't mind it. Now, one of the experiences that I've had, this was many years ago, was drinking sour beers from the brewery, which is out of Anaheim, California. And at the time, at least to me, they really leaned into the more acidic, tart character as opposed to just the complexity. I think their beers are phenomenal. But I had that next to a Russian River sour beer, or next next to a Cantillon sour beer, and they are, Russian River and Cantillon, I feel like go a little bit more into the complex, less tart thing and more funky. Whereas, the brewery and even the Rare Barrel, when they were around, as funky and complex as those beers were, they were a bit more tart on my palate than these other options. So, it's sours don't surprise me that people are going to like them or not going to like them. I mean, that's a easy one to pick because of how unique they are compared to every other beer style out there. So, no hate for me on the sour beer. No hate for me on you not liking it either, Christian. All right, here's a fun one. Austin Smith says, Milkshake IPA. This is a tough one. He goes, I'm not sure if I hate Milkshake IPA or barley wine more. I think maybe Milkshake IPA. There's just something about the lactose and the shitload of fruit they put in it that I do not care for one bit. I'm going to treat Milkshake IPA the same way I do personally the whole slushy sour thing. It's the same, in my mind, it's the same kind of mentality. It's creative, it's fun. There is a market for it. I think you're going to find people, sweet lovers in particular, folks who maybe don't like beer flavored beer that much, really get behind these Milkshake IPAs because they taste like smoothies. And that's great. I'm all for that. I don't hate them. I will absolutely drink a 2 to 4 ounce pour, but there's no way I'm going to be able to fit that much of a thick, fruited, IPA into my stomach, particularly when there's other beer flavored beers available. I'm going to prioritize those a bit, but I do think they're a lot of fun. So, okay, another repeat. Adam Bradley says, I don't hate wheat beers, but they're the one group of styles I don't go for when I'm buying craft beer or homebrewing. I just don't like the taste of the malt when in final beer form, but I have won a homebrew competition with a Goza, and I have plans for a Hefeweizen and Wit this year since I've never brewed them, and I'm game to try brewing any style if it strikes my fancy. I really like your mentality on this one, Adam, that it may not be your favorite, but you're still going to brew it. You've won awards with, wheated beers like Goza, and that's awesome. I've done the same thing. I'm not, I am by no means a cheerleader for Dunkelweiss, but one of the best beers I ever brewed in terms of the scores it got in competition was what I call Coco Nanilla, I guess Dunkelweiss. It was a very weird, creation that I threw together to taste sort of like one of those, not the Rocket Pop, but the one that looks like a Rocket Pop with banana and chocolate in it. And it worked surprisingly well. You get that isoamyl acetate, that banana character from these Weissbier yeasts. And when done right with the right ingredients, it can create some really complex and interesting, we'll call it art. Because I didn't really like the beer that much, but it did great in competition. So I feel where you're coming at. And I do the same thing. I like to brew beers that I may not, necessarily think are my favorite, but I just like trying my hand at it. And I always know that friends of mine are going to enjoy, there's going to be friends who have different preferences as me. So to have those on tap, I think is pretty cool. All right. Paul Beckers says, I'm not a fan of coffee beers as I'm not a coffee drinker and find the coffee profile, which he says is different than a roasty profile, to be somewhat acrid. I know people who absolutely abhor the flavor of coffee. So this does not surprise me. I'm not a big fan. When I'm brewing myself, I've got to delineate this. I don't like brewing with adjuncts. There's something about the natural beer ingredient list that I like to stick to. That said, I really like coffee beers. I've had several. I have made a few in my day. But man, there are some good ones out there that are just mind-blowingly tasty. But I love coffee as well. I'm not a coffee nerd by any means. That we'll leave that to Martin Keene. He's our coffee guy. But my goodness, a good coffee stout, a good coffee porter. I'm not the biggest fan of like golden stout. I just feel like it's a little bit, it's a little phony to me. But I like the flavor of coffee and beer, and I can fully understand why others like you, Paul, might not. Rune Millerjord says Imperial Pastry Stout. First of all, I hate, Rune says. And I'm little aside, Rune, I'm with you, buddy. I don't disagree with you on that. This is beer and it's a podcast. But he says, I really dislike when people use the word hate for something they just don't like. Anyway, I'm not a big fan of beers that are overly sweet. Imperial pastry stout is something I stay away from. Sipping on a quote plain imperial stout though can be nice. Yeah, I agree. I've already commented on my dislike of super sweet stuff in general, and these pastry stouts, as fun as they might be and as much of a place as I think they've earned, on a tap list, it's definitely not a style I'm asking for several times in a row. But I will say that if I go to a brewery that has a flight, which almost all of them do that I've been to, and they happen to have something like a pastry stout on tap, whether it's made with donuts or with Indian spices or whatever it might be, I'll usually get that in my flight because I think it's fun to try. I want to have that experience. So, but I get it. I'm not drinking a full pint of any sort of imperial stout, and if it has a bunch of sugar in it, even less so. All right, Daniel Eisenberg says, sour beers for me. I really tried. It sounds silly, but they are just too sour. I get that, Daniel. Again, whatever floats your boat. I know several people who, when I was first getting into the local homebrewing scene here about 20 years ago, sour beers were like, why would you do that? That's a sign of, contamination, that you did something wrong. We're all sour beer lovers now. So who knows, maybe in 10, 15 years, Daniel, you'll have jumped ship and come aboard the sour train. If not, that's perfectly fine as well. I know that flavor profile can be a bit off-putting. All right, Brülosophy's own Jordan Folk says, I hate milkshake IPA. Now, mind you, this is Jordan. Brews some of the best IPA I've ever had in my life. I hate milkshake IPA, he says. I don't think fruit works very well in hoppy beers in general, but I absolutely detest lactose or vanilla in a hoppy beer. All of these flavors just clash for me. Something about a pale, sweet, hoppy beer is just a disgusting result. I also hate hop burn, which is why my biggest complaint with standard hazy IPA, if it's saturated with hop flavor without the hop burn, I'm much more likely to enjoy it. Man, Jordan, you bring up something that I have to agree with that I hadn't quite recognized in the last milkshake IPA comment, and that's the use of vanilla in it. I don't mind vanilla. I love the smell of it on its own. I think it's great. Vanilla ice cream. If I'm eating ice cream, it's usually going to be vanilla. I hate vanilla in beer. I cannot stand vanilla in perfume. There's something about it that it does something to my stomach. And so, when I smell this pungent vanilla flavor in a beer, I don't care what style it is, it makes it a little less desirable for me, even if it's supposed to be, this fruity, milkshakey thing, and it's designed to have this vanilla character. You remove that, and chances are I'm going to like it even more. But that is a common ingredient in these milkshake IPAs, as well as these, slushy sour beers and all of that. So I get where you're coming from, Jordan. I'm not a big fan of that either. I don't know. I'm starting to wonder. I know that I've had beers that people call milkshake IPA, but I'm wondering how much of it I've had, because this is not every time, the last two times somebody has mentioned milkshake IPA, my mind goes to a slushy sour, or like a smoothie sour, as I've heard people refer to it. So who knows? But so far it's not leaving a good impression in my mind. Yuck. All right, Mangrove Mike, patron, says sour beer, at least kettle sours. Proper Belgian lambics are gorgeous because they're subtle, but most others just push it too far. I'm also developing a big dislike for fruit-enhanced beers, like a few of the hazy examples we're starting to see here in Australia, and I assume elsewhere. Too sweet, and it wrecks what could be a perfectly good beer. I don't know what else to say to that, Mangrove Mike, except for that I agree. I do like sour beer. The fruited hazy IPA, the milkshake IPA thing, obviously, you're not alone in your, aberrance of that. Not my favorite either. But I do, again, I think there's a place for it, just because I know there are people out there who find it fun to brew, and then others who like to drink what's brewed. So patron Tom Sills says, IPA. The word hate is bandied about too much these days. I prefer strongly to test for things I, P, and A. They're difficult to brew. Oxygenation happens in a moment, and I much prefer the taste of grains in my beverage of choice. Entirely disagree with you, Tom, but I appreciate the fact that you can have your own opinion. I love IPA. I love hops. I also love malt. I also love yeast. Yeah, and I love water. I think there's the fact that we have this smattering of styles that emphasize, maybe not water, but those three other main ingredients, I think is awesome. And it allows us to have a variety of beers on tap that kind of satiates each one of those desires. You can have a super hoppy beer with muted malt and low fermentation character. You could go with a Weiss beer and just have all fermentation character with maybe a little bit of malt and no hops. And you could go super malty with low hops, low bitterness, low yeast character. That's awesome to me. So, but I get where you're coming from, and I know you're not alone because my father-in-law absolutely hates IPA. Anytime I try to sneak him one that I have on tap, the face he makes is worth it. So, all right. Jorn Rongard says Belgian IPA. All right, you hit my number 2, Jorn. While I generally love IPA and Belgian-style beers on their own, I stay away from Belgian IPA. To me, the Belgian yeast flavors clash with the hop bitterness and produces a very dissonant taste. My brother, amen. It is absolutely disgusting to me. I've had several commercial examples of Belgian IPA. A local friend of mine who is one of the best IPA brewers, made what he said was a beautiful example of a Belgian IPA. I cannot get behind it. Now, smoked beer, it comes up to my nose and I start to feel like I'm going to puke. Belgian IPA, I'll just take a sip and I can stomach it, but I do not like it. I think it's nasty. The blending, I think it's probably why this style didn't really make it. The first commercial example I ever had, kind of like a prior commenter, was at Stone Brewing. This was probably 15 years ago or so. My wife and I went down there. We had one kid at the time, and we're just going on a little San Diego trip from where we live here in Fresno. And my wife had something to take care of in the Escondido area. So she dropped me off at Stone. I was there for about an hour by myself. I did not go on the tour. That's not something I really do these days, actually. But I'm sitting in there and I ordered one of their big flights. I think there was like 10 beers on this flight. I was not driving, thankfully. And one of the beers was their Cali Belgique. I've never had a beer that I thought tasted like throw up going down. And I will never make one of those again. That is a style like Rausch. I would probably make a Rausch beer before I make a Belgian IPA, because I know at least some people who like Rausch beer. I don't know many people. Is it Rauch beer? I think it's Rauch beer, but I do know some people who like that style. And I don't know many who are big fans of Belgian IPA. And the last thing I want is to make a beer that's just going to sit around on tap for years, basically. All right. Jonathan Williams says barley wine. With the exception of a few barrel-aged versions that have been very good, I find them cloyingly sweet, and I just can't do it. Understood, Jonathan. I also, I like barley wine. I didn't like it in the beginning of my foray into brewing and beer, but I've really come around to it. And I think part of it is that I love like when I drink whiskey, and I love every type of whiskey out there. Irish whiskey is the lowest on my list, but pretty much every other type of whiskey out there, I drink neat. I don't put ice in it. I don't drop water into it. I really like that rich, whiskey flavor. And there's something about barley wine, even though it's not distilled, there's no spirits in it, nothing like that. There's something about it that kind of harkens that whiskey experience to me. And I'm not chugging it. I'm not, sipping pint after pint, nothing like that. But, a nice 12-ounce pour, sitting around in my living room watching a movie or something. I love it. I think it's great. Again, my friend Matt Human makes one of the best barley wines. He's a really good brewer of beer, but the big beers that he makes really are impressive to me. And that was one of the beers that really changed my mind about barley wine, got me brewing my own. And I've been quite pleased with a lot of the barley wines that I've brewed. Now, I think one of the issues is, like you mentioned, Jonathan, you say barrel aged, but I'm gonna drop barrel and just put aged. This is one of those styles that really does get better over time, in my experience at least. I did the short and shoddy barley wine many years ago, and we were drinking it. It was short and shoddy. We were drinking it like a month after it was brewed, and it was good, but I let that keg sit around for a year, and Tim and I went back and were sampling it, and it became something new. It became better. I don't know if that's oxidation. I don't know if there's something else, magical that happens with time, but I think age is one of those factors with barley wine, with imperial stout, these bigger beers that really can bring it into its own. So, but I get where you're coming from on that. Also, just big beers in general, I think, can be tough for people to get behind. So, patron Jedediah Allen says, first of all, hate's a strong word when talking about beer. Yep, you're right. That being said, two beer styles I quote hate are Hefeweizen when not having a Bayerisch Frühstück, because the flavor is too close to a Belgian, and I'd rather have that. And the second is huge 15% ABV barley wines, because they're mostly just a cloying, syrupy, unbalanced mess, even from the best breweries. Yeah, I would have to say that your barley wine comment is purely subjective. I can understand why people perceive them that way, but when they're made the way they're supposed to be made and it's made right, that cloying, syrupy mess is what people are after, maybe. And maybe they don't perceive it that way. I certainly don't. But again, they have to be made right. Have I had a barley wine that tastes like somebody poured, maple syrup into a cup, threw some hops in and added some vodka? Absolutely. But the good ones that I've had don't taste like that. At least that's not how I conceive of them. Now, again, Weissbier, Hefeweizen, that is it's not uncommon for people to taste that and be like, whoa, that's different. Not a fan. To say that they're like Belgians, I guess I get where you're coming from with that. But to me, Belgian beer is different, not just because of the yeast that's used. They are different yeast, but they have a lot of similar characteristics. But when you look at the gestalt of a good, say, Belgian double or Belgian triple, those are brewed differently than Weissbier. The Weissbier is going to have a bunch of wheat in it. It's going to be a lower ABV typically. And they just present so differently to me. Now I'm wondering, if you were to serve me, a Weissbier next to a triple or something like that, would I even be able to tell them apart if blinded? I think so. But I would take Belgians. I'm with you on that. I'd take a Belgian over a Weissbier any day, just because I like that flavor profile more, but I still like Weissbier just fine as well. I think it is a unique style in and of itself. All right. Clayton says, hazy IPA, because it tastes like someone ruined a beer with a bunch of all-purpose flour. There are more hops used to make them than a West Coast IPA, but I can barely taste them. I've had award-winning hazy IPA fresh at the breweries, and they all taste muddled and ruined to me. Yeah, man, I cannot disagree that it is weird to me how muted the hop character often is in, even the best examples of hazy IPA, commercially speaking. I don't know what that is. I have a feeling that the people who love that style, like it's their favorite style, I have a feeling they perceive it differently than me. That's what I've told myself. But I experience the same thing you do, even in styles that I enjoy drinking. I just accept that it's not going to taste as crisp, hoppy, as a West Coast IPA or a classic American IPA. I've wondered, I don't know this, but I've wondered if it's really because of what we all, know about water chemistry and the fact that a lot of hazy IPA, they're really leaning into the use of calcium chloride over gypsum, right? Over calcium sulfate. And, you use that sulfate. They say you increase your sulfate levels, you're going to get a lot punchier of a hop character. And maybe we're just used to that. So the way we perceive these higher calcium chloride hazy IPA beers is that it's not as punchy, even though it's still really hoppy. I have a friend who pretty much just makes hazy IPA with maybe a Pilsner thrown in here or there. And he told me, his thing was that the idea is to make the hops taste like fruit juice, not like hops. So it's not that the hop character isn't there. It's that it's so different compared to a West Coast IPA that we might just describe it in a way that doesn't really fit our conception of what an IPA tastes like. Either way, I'm with you. I get what you're saying, but I don't hate hazy IPA. It's just a different type of beer to me. Okay, James Splinter, real unique here, says smoked beer. Cannot do it. Nothing about it sounds refreshing, especially when it feels like you're drinking a beer through a used cigarette filter. Peaty Scotch, on the other hand, is perfectly fine. This is the third person, myself included, who likes peaty, smoky Scotch, but cannot get behind smoked beer. I wonder if it's a genetic thing, if there's like some weird thing in our brains, sort of like cilantro and soap, that makes it hard to drink. It is impossible for me to drink one without wanting to upchuck, So I'm with you, James. And that's such a weird phenomenon that consistently what we're seeing is the folks who don't like smoked beer seem to like smoky everything else. Now, I don't know if I would characterize it as drinking beer through a used cigarette filter. To me, it really tastes like burnt bacon. And how anybody finds that pleasurable, or the term you used is perfect, refreshing, I don't know, but I'm glad they do. That's wonderful for them. I'm just not going to get behind it. All right. Final hated beer of this segment. William Behun says, when my late wife first tried to introduce me to sours, as a brewer, they just tasted like good beer gone bad. Then the light switch flipped and now I love most sours, but I can never get over my hatred of Gosa, which just tastes like stomach acid. I can just drink enough to be sick and get that flavor if I want it. Here's my Gosa story. The very first time I ever sampled this, it was homebrewed. And as I'm sure at least some of our listeners can relate, if somebody comes to you and says, hey, I brewed a Gosa, and you're like, cool, have you ever had a real Gosa, like, commercially brewed? And, they usually will say, no, but I read about the style in the BJCP guidelines and, went to a forum and found a recipe and I made it. And you take a sip and it tastes like, fish brine. That is not what Gosa is supposed to taste like. It is not supposed to taste like you made a beer with seawater. Yes, it's got a higher sodium content. We know that. It is a sour beer. It's got wheat in it. It's low ABV. All of those things, if done right, in my opinion, can actually taste quite good. A local brewery here, I forget which one it was, so I'm not going to call them out, but they made a summer Gosa that had like lime in it, and it was so good, so easy to drink, and that salt was barely perceptible. I don't think anybody would have described it as salty, but it really added this savory, almost umami-like component to this beer that made you want to drink more, which salt does. It was really good, but oh my God, you make a Gosa bad and you'll never go back to it. Again, stomach acid, probably a good way to describe the way that could taste because it is, tart. If you're making a Gosa, do it right. Don't overly salinate, salt your beer. It's not going to taste very good. So, all right, we'll be right back with more hated beer styles.
This podcast is supported by Trust and Will, an online estate planning service. Visit trustandwill.com for details.
If you're thinking about what you'll leave behind, Trust and Will can make sure your values live on.
For me, it's beyond money. It's about responsibility. When I pass on, I want my children and grandchildren to be provided for, of course. But I also want their spiritual futures protected. Trust and Will made it easy to make sure that any decision I had to make in sickness or in death would reflect the values that I've upheld all my life. And you know what? Trust and Will gave me the peace of mind that my legacy would be more about purpose than possessions.
Protect your legacy and your loved ones today, tomorrow, and beyond with Trust and Will. Get 20% off when you visit trustandwill.com/support. That's trustandwill.com/support to get 20% off. trustandwill.com/SUPPORT.
We all know that designing recipes is really fun, and doing it well is so much easier with good software. We at Brülosophy recently made the switch to Brewfather, and honestly, y'all, we could not be happier. Brewfather utilizes the latest technology to bring you the most robust cloud-based recipe design software that can be accessed anywhere, on your phone, tablet, desktop, and even offline. It also works seamlessly with numerous third-party devices to make it easier to monitor every step of your brew. I know change can be difficult, but trust me when I say you need to go to brewfather.app today to try it out for yourself. That's brewfather.app.
We're going to kick this next segment off with contributor Martin Keen's most hated beer style, which is, drumroll please, Rauch beer. I don't really enjoy any type of smoked beer, but this one is absolute worst. It probably didn't help that when I brewed my own, I used 95% cherrywood smoked malt. Oh boy. Everything, and I mean everything in my brewery smelled like a bonfire during brew day, and it took an extra helping of PBW to clear the smell out of my keg after it was done. Martin, you already know, buddy, that I'm right there with you. I appreciate the fact that we're all different. We have different preferences. There are a few beer styles that I taste and I'm like, how could anybody like this? Rauch beer's one. It feels like people had to do a lot of mental gymnastics to get behind enjoying that style of beer. Maybe it's the romanticism behind the fact that, all beers were originally smoky because of the way they had to kiln the grains and all of that. I don't even care. It is so gross to me. A buddy of mine made a 100%, I don't know if it was cherrywood smoked malt, which my understanding is cherrywood malt really is kind of the most pungent smoked malt. But they made a 100%, smoked malt Rauch beer. And it was the grossest thing that I think I've put in my mouth. That was brewed by a brewer, not my thing. So, I'm with you, Martin. Patron Ewan Dawson says, I hate sour beers because I have to have a Pepto-Bismol chaser with every pint. I also hate dessert flavored beers, not only because I'm lactose intolerant, but also because, quote, I've been drinking beer for 20 years and I've never wished once that it tasted more like cake. Yes, I agree with you. And I love the quote there on the pastry beer thing. I get it. Again, I think they're fun. Not my jam for pint after pint. But sour beer, man, I get that they're acidic. They can cause issues with reflux and all of that fun stuff. Take a Pepto-Bismol and enjoy the beer. I mean, I take Prilosec. I take a half a Prilosec every day, which is pretty cool, and it works perfectly fine for me. If I know I'm going to a sour brewery or I'm going to be drinking, acidic beer, I'm taking a whole Prilosec that day because I want to enjoy myself without feeling it later on. Next one comes from Kelly Woods. This is an interesting one, a beer style I've never heard of. She says, my homebrew club has a secret ingredient competition every year. Last year, the secret ingredient was taco seasoning. I do not recommend beyond entertainment value. Kelly, I can almost guarantee you I will never make a taco beer. That being said, it was a secret ingredient, or I guess a unique ingredient competition where I won. I did so well with that Coco Nanilla Dunkelweiss that I talked about earlier. And also, I've had a beer that's sort of along these same lines. It was a pizza beer that I forget if it was commercial or if a friend of mine made it, but it was god awful. And I'm with you. Very entertaining to try. Very well done. I'm sure several folks listening right now have probably heard about, if not at least sampled these pickle beers. Most of them are kind of in that Gosa line of styles. They're not as terrible as they sound, but taco beer, oh my gosh, that sounds god awful. No, thank you. Drew Carlson says, bitter dark beer. As an almost exclusive West Coast IPA fan, I thought I'd hate every dark beer that I'd encounter based on previous negative experiences. But it turns out that it's the bitterness from heavily roasted grains that aren't balanced with any sweetness in the finish that turns me off. Hop bitterness is fine. Go figure. Makes me wonder, Drew, if it's not necessarily the bitterness, but that astringency, or from the literally burnt grains or the burnt husks. That's something that I can get behind. It's what I like about coffee. I tend to drink my coffee black, and if not, it's just with a little bit of liquid creamer to cool it off because I'm usually in a rush in the morning. But yeah, I get where you're coming from. That can be kind of off-putting for some. I rather like it. I'm assuming that included in this bitter dark beer umbrella of yours are classic Irish stout like Guinness, Beamish, Murphy, stuff like that. I love that stuff. I love everything about them. I love the strength. I love the flavor. I love the way they feel in my mouth. So again, whatever floats your boat, but I get where you're coming from. That astringency that you get from those burnt grains can be quite off-putting for some. I get that. Stephen Finnemore says, hate is a strong word. There it is again. But it's a toss-up between sours and anything super high ABV. I just don't see the enjoyment of either. Let's go with sours as my most aboard, if I can just choose one. Yeah, obviously you're not alone in that. I think it could take quite a bit of mental work for people to get, over the tartness in a beer when that's not what you're used to. But like I said earlier, I do think that there is the ability to, I guess we could call it like the evolution of one's palate. I've experienced it with several styles of beer, and I've known many people, perhaps more than any other style out there, come around to sour beer through, over time, through continuous samplings, of sours. And again, don't write them totally off, because there are, quote, sour beers out there that we would kind of clump under that umbrella that aren't as tart as, some of the stuff here in the United States, where we really do seem to lean into the acidity as opposed to that funky complexity, which can be very enjoyable. Though if your argument is that they taste like beer gone bad, that part may not, who knows, may not change. All right, contributor Cade Job says most non-alcoholic beers, as well as beers made with sorghum. These are both recent flips for me. I used to really enjoy them, but something changed, and now I don't like them. I will agree with Cade on the non-alcoholic beer. I have yet to have one. I've said this several times. I've yet to have a non-alcoholic beer that I liked better than sparkling water. I would just rather drink sparkling water. They don't taste like beer to me, even the good ones. Athletic, good for you for making what is apparently the best non-alcoholic beer out there. I've had them. They taste fine. They're not for me. I'm not going to buy a 6-pack of non-alcoholic beer when it costs the same as alcoholic beer and doesn't taste as good, in my opinion. That's just where I am with that. I'm being honest about it. Sorghum beer. Now, my understanding is that this would be more for the gluten-free, gluten-intolerant crowd. I've never had gluten-free beer before, that I can recall at least. But I do remember Cade talking with me about his experience with a gluten-free brewery, I believe up in Oregon, and how he was shocked at how tasty their beers are. So to hear that he has flipped on that, again, we've talked about the evolution of one's palate going in the direction of appreciating beer styles they started not liking. And it sounds like for Cade, for both non-alcoholic and sorghum beers, that it went the opposite direction. He started off thinking they were okay, and now just isn't a fan of them. So that's kind of an interesting shift. Okay, here's one I try not to let the opinions of other people affect me, on a visceral level. But Corey Emal, you're getting me with this one. He says, I absolutely cannot get the hang of California Common. I've overcome my personal hangups with almost every style I've initially not had a taste for. But every time I've ordered a Cal Common, including several times in San Francisco at Anchor, I am no closer to liking them. Corey, look, I'm glad that you're, in the minority of people, presumably, who do not like what I believe is one of the top 5 best styles on earth. To me, California Common is the perfect example of a non-pale beer-flavored beer. It is crisp. It is crushable to 10 out of 10 crushable. It is so beautifully flavored. The Northern Brewer hops contribute this classic kind of woody, slight minty, just sharply bitter. Oh, everything about that style. It's going to be one of the first ones I brew. My electrician is coming out on Monday of this week. So the day this episode drops, my electrician will be here. Hopefully to do the install so that I can get brewing by next weekend. And it is on my top 5 list of styles that I'll be making. So while I disagree with you, I do appreciate your opinion on this one. And thank you for sharing it with us. I will say, I did a tally of all the beer styles, and I'll be sharing that at the end of this episode. You are the only one, my friend, who said California Common. So you got that going for you. All right, patron Joey Steckler says, I have yet to find a Saison that I like. I enjoy a variety of traditional fruited sour beers and farmhouse ales, so I expected Saisons to overlap more for me, but the spicy, earthy character just doesn't click. On their own, I like spicy beers and earthy IPAs, but something about how those flavors play in a Saison never works for me. If I see one on a taproom board, I am almost always passing. All right. Sitting here today, Joey, I disagree with you. I love Saison. I think it's great. I have had examples of Saison that I don't think are that good. I've had really watery examples, overly carbonated examples. They need to be highly carbonated, in my opinion, to really present as the type of Saison that I enjoy. But if you overdo it, it hits your palate, hits your mouth, and it just explodes with bubbles, and then all the flavor is gone. I'm not a big fan of that. But a well-made Saison to me I struggle to think of a more refreshing style of beer than a nice well-made farmhouse ale or Saison. And now I remember when I was first dabbling in making Saison myself. It's not a style that I've invested much time in, but I've made a handful of batches. And at the time, the French Saison strain, 3711, I think, from Y East was very popular. And so, it didn't get stuck. It would ferment dry. There was all these good qualities about it. So my friends and I just kind of hopped on that bandwagon and we're making 3711 beers. And I thought, I'm just not a big fan of Saison. Well, it wasn't until I stepped away from that strain and went and started trying more of the classic Saison strains that I realized my love for Saison really was there. It was that specific yeast that I wasn't a big fan of. Now, I will say that strain does great in cider. If you're fermenting store-bought apple juice, I think it's phenomenal for that. I also really like the French Saison strain in dry hopped Saison. So it doesn't really have all of those characteristics of Saison because those hops overwhelm a lot of it. But there's something about the way it plays with, modern American and New World hops that I think works really well. But I can get where you're coming from, Joey. Saison is one of those styles that I think is a little bit difficult to get behind for people who are more familiar with clean American beers. All right, David Holloway says, folks will hate me for saying this. I won't hate you, David, I promise. But I don't like Belgian-style beers. Not sure why, but my palate just says nope. It's interesting. Belgian ale is one of those, and I'm sure a lot of people can identify with this. It's one of those styles or a group of styles that a lot of homebrewers start off making. And there's a reason for that. Homebrew shop owners want you to come back. They want you to stay in the hobby. And Belgian ale, as much as people might want to fight this or disagree with it, and this is not a negative, it can cover up, flaws because of that real notable fermentation character. And so I think for some folks, maybe this is the case for you, David, those characteristics might be associated in some way, shape, or form with bad beer, even though a good Belgian ale, that's how it's supposed to taste. And to me, I think they're beautiful. As far as classic, and I'm going to put this in quotes, basic beers go, I mean, a Belgian triple is about as easy as it gets to make a beer that I feel is a work of art, and can just taste phenomenally good. I have friends who, when they make triple, they make double, they're adding adjuncts because there's so much that you can do to make it unique and to make it its own. So I'm a big fan of Belgian ale. That's not to say that that's all I brew. I mean, I might make one or two when my brewery's back up and running and I've got a constant, rotation of beers on tap. I might make one or two Belgians a year. It's not like it's a favorite of mine, but I have a massive appreciation for them. And when they're well made, in my opinion, they're quite delicious. All right, Mark Rose says, yet again, simple soured beers, especially fruited sours. I've made them, enjoyed them in the past, but for unknown reasons, they now just evoke an association with vomit. Complex sours like lambics or Brett beers don't trip the same trigger, and I enjoy them greatly, but put a lacto-only sour in front of me, and I will pass. We had the commenter earlier, make a joke about the kind of highfalutin hoity-toityness of sour beer brewers, and yeah, there's that in every realm. I've tended to notice it the most in the traditional lager brewing world, but I get it. I do have a feeling that, I've rubbed shoulders with some relatively well-known folks in the sour beer world, and there is kind of a badge of honor in proclaiming your hatred of kettle sours, of quick sours. And I think part of that is that, it takes a lot of time. Some would say that time is effort, I suppose, to make a truly complex traditional, Oud Bruin or Flemish Red, and that's great. That's wonderful. But these quick turnaround kettle sours that are much more leaning into that lactic acidity as opposed to the complexity that you get from these other bugs. I love them. Maybe it's just me. I've turned around a Berliner Weiss that I kettle soured with grains, uncrushed grains, in a matter of a week. And that keg is gone in 3 days because it's low ABV, it's crushable, it's got a nice complexity to it. But I get where you're coming from, Mark. I do think that once you kind of hone your preferences on one way of doing things, it can be really difficult to integrate a different way, whether that's new or not. And kettle souring absolutely is one of those approaches that I know several people who are diehard sour beer folks are just adamantly against. So you're not alone in that one. Angus Lowe, how many times is this going to come up? West Coast Hazy IPA, he says. It just relies too much on fruity flavor that overwhelms any malt flavor you may have had. Plus, 4 out of 5 beers in the Pacific Northwest are hazy, so there are always too many of them on tap in bars and breweries. I'm not entirely sure what you mean by West Coast hazy IPA. To me, these days, we're all using pretty much the same hops to make our hazy IPA. So whether it's made, in Boston or in Seattle, each brewery is going to have their own approach and their own flavor profile or house flavor, whatever. But I think that most of them are relying on pretty much a similar process. Maybe, in the Pacific Northwest, I've not had one, and I visit there fairly frequently. I still have family up there. I was up there 2 weeks ago. The hazy IPAs I get up there taste about the same as the ones I get down here, which taste fairly similar to the ones I've gotten on the East Coast. So, your mileage may vary on that, but I get the general sentiment that the fruity flavor overwhelms any malt. Yeah, I think that's the point. I think the malt. I think most hazy IPA fans or brewers of the style, at least, view the malt as being the canvas on which you use the hoppy paint, to create your work of art. So it's there for mouthfeel. It's there for just that subtle, backbone of malt without being in your face. It's really supposed to taste like fruit juice. Again, my understanding. So, to me, what is the worst when it comes to a hazy IPA, as weird as this sounds, what I love about West Coast or American IPA is how the bitterness is assertive enough to balance that higher ABV, which you get from the malt. What I cannot stand about hazy IPA is when they blend all that other fruitiness with bitterness. It really makes it difficult for me to palate, to put in my mouth and finish. I kind of want it to be less bitter because there's a clash that happens between the hop bitterness and that fruity stuff. So that's probably on some level how they came to invent this style, the evolution of IPA in general. I don't know, but I also get where you're coming from, Angus. All right. Eric Shepard. Oh, we got a second one here. He says, I wouldn't say I hate any beer style, but there are certainly ones I generally stay away from. The one that jumped to mind first for me was non-alcoholic beers. I've tried several, and even the ones that everyone says taste just like regular beer never taste right to me. And there has never been one that I thought I'd like more than just drinking water. At this point, I'm done even trying non-alcoholic beers. So if one magically pops up that actually tastes like regular beer, I'll probably never know. You know what, Eric? I think in general, I'm with you that I likely wouldn't know. I'm never going to buy a non-alcoholic beer. There is not a scenario in my, the rest of the life that I have ahead of me, however long that might be, where I'm going to fork money out to buy a non-alcoholic beer. I will just drink water. I mean, that's where I'm at. But I'm in a position with Brülosophy where people send me stuff they know I don't like. It's kind of fun. They're like, oh, we're going to change this guy's mind, or we just want to see how he reacts to, drinking these beers he says he doesn't like. So there's probably a good chance at some point, maybe the brew club is going to select non-alcoholic beer for their average brew thing. And I'm going to end up drinking, 10 of those with my friends. So who knows? And if they're good, I'll comment on it. My thing is, part of what makes beer is alcohol. And I'm so glad that those who have ditched alcohol altogether have an option to satiate their thirst for the flavor of beer. That's not me. If I were to cut out alcohol altogether, I'm not going to go drink a non-alcoholic beer because it would make me want to drink a regular beer. And that's just my own personality. So. All right. Patron Travis Ammon says, I have a funny story on this subject that also incorporates the Dunning-Kruger effect. For those who are unfamiliar with that it's the very, very general explanation or idea is that those with the least amount of experience tend to come off as thinking that they are the best or have the most knowledge and intelligence about a specific topic. So as it relates to homebrewing, you're all familiar with it. The person who's brewed 3 batches will go on to tell somebody who's been in it, for a similar amount of time that they know everything. And that if you do it this way, it's the right way, yada, yada. The more experience you get in homebrewing, the less likely you are to do that. That is not universal, by the way. We're all very familiar with certain people out there who've been doing it forever who act like they are the king of homebrewing. Or queen, however you want to put that. So, all right, one of the first beers I brewed, this is coming from Travis, as a home brewer was a Belgian triple from an LME kit. Keep in mind, not only had I never brewed a Belgian beer, I'd never even tasted a Belgian beer. After bottle conditioning, I excitedly cracked open the first bottle and immediately detected an awful off flavor. I began, quote, expertly evaluating and determined the beer was oxidized and possibly even infected. It was awful. It wasn't until I picked up a couple commercial examples of Belgian Triple that I realized I'd actually brewed a good version of the style. I also learned I didn't like Belgian beers. However, I have since developed a taste for them. Again, Travis, you're sharing a kind of a historical story, and your palate apparently has evolved in the same way that many of ours has when it comes to certain beer styles. Belgian beers can be really difficult to get behind. You think about the fact that when, most people, when they're getting into homebrewing, or at least at the time I did, we were jumping from, Bud Miller Coors, and then, we found a craft brewery that we liked in the early 2000s. How can I do that at home? And, maybe you've sampled 4 different styles and now you're brewing your own. And oftentimes that would be a Belgian ale. So I get how you're like, this does not taste like what I was, drinking at the craft brewery that I was at last week, whatever. It can be tough to get around. I wasn't the biggest fan of Belgian ales in the beginning either, but I love them nowadays. So. All right, Vincent Fabiani says, most beers fermented with Belgian yeast. This is a commonality here. They wreck my palate. I don't hate them. I just can't stand the taste. To be fair, I try one every year or so to see if anything has changed. Maybe 2026 will be the year for me. That's funny. My mother-in-law, my kids call her Omi. She has a bunch of fun little, you could tell she was an elementary school teacher for her entire life. Her whole career was as a second to fourth grade teacher. I believe it was second to fourth. And she has this thing that if you don't like something, try it once a year. Maybe your mind will change. And I would say maybe 7-8 years ago, I was hanging out with Jersey and his wife at their house. And my whole life, I've been anti-tomato. I tried it when I was a kid. It made me puke. Anytime somebody snuck one on a burger or whatever, if it was a raw tomato, I just could not stomach it. Weirdly enough, you cook that tomato, put it in soup, make even just baked tomatoes with salt on it, and I love it. Something about the cooking of it, brings out the sweetness and the good flavor. But a raw tomato in any form, I was absolutely against. Well, Jersey's wife, Amber, made a joke and challenged me to eat, a cherry tomato. And I was like, I could do that. It's not going to make me sick. So I pop it in my mouth, and I had to grit it and pretend I didn't feel like throwing up, but I ate the thing. And in that moment, I thought of my mother-in-law, and I thought, what if I did this more than once a year? What if I actually tried tomatoes in the form that I've convinced myself I don't like them? Could I train my palate to accept them? Well, I'm happy to say I eat tomatoes now. How weird is that? I think of this in a much smaller form, ostensibly, when it comes to what Vincent said here, that, try a Belgian ale every year. Maybe at some point it'll click. Maybe you'll try one, a commercial example that really does it for you and proves to you that they don't all taste exactly the same, that there are differences, and that perhaps there is, a style of Belgian ale out there that's for you. So. All right, contributor Alex Shanksable, who, as an aside, congratulations to Alex. They just became a father for the first time, and we are so excited for that. Alex says, barrel-aged beers. I tried so hard to like them. The romanticism is undeniable. The, quote, brewers of old certainly didn't ferment and serve from steel Coca-Cola kegs, so barrel aging is a beautiful nod to tradition. But I am sick and tired of 15% ABV bourbon-flavored stouts being the gold standard for special occasions. I want to enjoy fermentation character, hops, and malt, not an imitation of something else. If I wanted to taste whiskey, I'd just order a whiskey. Same goes for other beers replicating other spirits or foods. Oh, man. This is one that I can absolutely relate with. I am not against barrel-aged beers. But when they're done wrong, when the spirit that was in that barrel before is so noticeable that it almost overwhelms the flavor of the beer, I will not drink it. That is not, I'm with you, Alex. That is not what I ordered this beer for. I wanted the subtle hint of that flavor. I have a buddy who made a popular, like a whiskey laden porter out there, and it called for pouring in. Right? Not like soaking staves or wood chips in whiskey. It called for actually pouring in whiskey into this beer, and it tasted like whiskey. No, thank you. Not my jam. So I'm with you on that one, Alex. Patron Lucas K says, anything that doesn't taste like beer. especially milkshake IPA. There it is again. My goodness. And other fruit flavored beers. Also, although I was born less than 100 miles away from Munich, I hate Weiss beer. The Weiss beer thing doesn't surprise me. I think that is kind of you have to have a taste for it, as they say. But there seems to be some relative consistency with this whole fruited IPA or milkshake IPA thing. Yeah, man, I get it. To me, I told this to a friend many years ago. If there's fruit flavor in an IPA, my expectation is that it came from the hops. And that's where I'm still at today. That's not to say I won't appreciate an artistically created milkshake IPA. If it's overly laden with vanilla flavor or lactose, yeah, I'm not going to drink much of it, but I can still appreciate it. At the same time, I appreciate folks who can't get on that train with me. Patron Mike Z says, for me, the winner, this is a unique one, if we're even allowed to call it that, is Keller beer. I genuinely don't understand how an unfinished, not quite there beer somehow graduated into a style. I get the romantic idea of pulling a mug straight from a tank in some ancient cellar, especially since I'm from Europe, where you can literally walk into pubs that are hundreds of years old. That whole rustic experience actually sounds pretty appealing. But pasteurized Keller beers, what an abomination. To me, it feels like a style that exists purely to celebrate all the things we usually try very hard not to put in our beer, like diacetyl, acetaldehyde, and that lovely, quote, green beer vibe. But hey, if that's your jam, more Keller beer for you and more literally anything else for me. Oh man, Mike, when I first heard about Keller beer, God, I don't even know. This must have been 10 or so years ago. I thought it was a I didn't even think it was like a real style. It is like, it's in the BJCP. I mean, this is a real thing because it just sounds like unfinished, pale lager. And that is sort of what it is. But I got to say, man, I had in my day, I have had some great Keller beer, and maybe that explains a little bit about like why I'm okay fermenting lagers warm and not, lagering them for 15 years and all of that. Maybe there's something about that vibe that I kind of get into, but I get where you're coming from. I think there might be a little bit, for some people at least, when they hear about Keller beer, they're so locked into traditional lager, brewing and that whole, what surrounds it, that Keller beer just even sounds like an abomination. So we have to kind of treat it that way. But if you find a good one, maybe you'll like it. I don't give up on them yet. I've had some that I thought were going to be gross, where I was blown away. I believe one of them was actually Pilsner Urquell. I was in Ireland when my wife and I went to Dublin for their. I've talked about it recently for one of their annual homebrew fests. We went to this really interesting Czech bar in Dublin, and they had your Guinness and all that stuff, but they really were emphasizing all of the Czech beers, and they had a cask of Pilsner Urquell unfiltered, which I believe classifies technically as a Keller beer. It was hazy, it was delicious, it was crushable, it was refreshing. So yeah, I haven't given up on that style, but I get where you're coming from. All right, Brian Stevens says, I've never heard of this. Tree sap beer. Not particularly a defined style, but let's just collectively stop trying to make beer where the water is replaced with tree sap. It never turns out better. I've never tasted one where it contributed anything to the flavor, and it would just be better to go get boiled down and turned into some yummy syrup. My brother, when I got my twin brother into brewing what was that, 15 years ago or so, he was living in Endicott, New York at the time. And while we were out there, we brewed a batch of like brown ale or something like that. And then the families, our two families went on a cool little trip to a local maple sap farm where, they tap the maple trees, and then it's a really cool setup. I mean, it's like a maze of tubes that go from tree to tree, and then it all dumps into, one collective bucket. And then that gets taken over to a boiling room, and they boil it down into sap. At least that was the way this neat little farm that we went to operated. My brother made a comment, wouldn't it be cool to take some of that sap, which is very watery, it's not like sticky tree sap from a pine tree, and make a beer with it? Well, I don't know anybody personally who's tried that. I didn't know that was a thing, but it sounds like wherever Brian lives, that maybe it is. It became kind of popular or something. I can't imagine it would contribute much flavor at all. We got to taste the maple tree sap, and it really does just taste like water. It does not taste like maple. You really have to condense it down and get those sugars, caramelized for it to taste the way maple syrup tastes. So it seems like a lot of work, probably a lot of money to make something that really isn't going to impact your beer very much. So I'm presuming here, Brian, but it sounds like it's not your hatred of the flavor of tree sap beers. It's perhaps your criticism about the process when it doesn't contribute anything meaningful to the flavor of beer. And that I can get behind. It does sound like a waste of time. All right. Jason May says, any IPA that tastes like I'm either licking a pine tree or eating a mouthful of hop pellets like some sort of hamster. Beer needs balance. I don't hate hoppiness. Hoppy pale ales can be great. I just need a balance of hops and malt, plus an appropriate yeast and water profile to make the style cohesive and rounded. Or maybe I'm just a snob for German and Czech Pilsners. Well, you wouldn't be the only snob out there when it comes to lager beers. But I get what you're saying. I often refer to IPA that has more of a pine character or resinous character as Pacific Northwest or PNW IPA, because when I was cutting my teeth on craft beer up there in the early 2000s, that's what every IPA tasted like at every brewery of the 3 breweries that I frequented. That's what they tasted like. I moved to California and I'm like, whoa, these taste like fruit, And so I think it has to do with hop choice. When you say chewing on hop pellets like some sort of a hamster, I can't help but wonder if you're not referring to what Jordan earlier referred to as hop burn. It leaves this kind of fuzzy feeling in your mouth that, in my opinion, isn't very pleasant at all. I've not gotten that in most, clear, crisp IPAs. It's usually something that I perceive, if I'm going to perceive it at all, in hazy IPA, which does that will make me like it less. So I'm with you on that, but I also don't mind, characteristics in IPA that I've heard people shit on that I actually quite like: piney, bitter, resinous. I actually kind of like a little bit of a kind of a sharp, rindy, grapefruity punch to my IPA that I know some people don't really fancy in the world of, Galaxy and Mosaic IPAs, where it really tastes like just overripe fruit. To me, it takes me back to the days of my learning how to drink craft beer, I suppose. All right, Whiskey Will Babcock. Here we go again. The irony for me is that I love the smoky flavor of bourbon and scotch and tequila, he says. Yet I cannot stand smoked beer. I'm not sure what it is, but for me, it's like when you drink orange juice right after brushing your teeth. I love OJ and I love mint, but together, yuck. That's how I feel about smoked beer. That might be the best description of how I experience smoked beer as well. That it's like the combination of these two things that I otherwise enjoy on their own. They come together and that gestalt just is yuck. It does not work for me. And it's on a visceral level. Like it does something to my insides that I don't like. So I'm with you there. And you are obviously not alone, Will. There were so many people who listed smoked beer. All right. Last patron comment comes from Justin Gerharder, who says, triple IPA, also known as American Strong Ale. There's just no need. I said what I said. Oh, yeah, man. Here's the thing. When we call it triple IPA, which I understand a lot of people now are just referring to it as an American Strong Ale, it does feel kind of like, oh, then why not make a quad IPA? Let's make a septuplet, IPA. You could just keep going on. And yeah, I do feel like there's not really a need for it. But I've had some good American Strong Ale. They're hoppy, they're assertive, they've got a nice balance of malt. They are strong, usually upwards of between 8 and 12% ABV in my experience, and sometimes they're pretty good. The problem is, for me, they taste better with age. And what else happens with age? That hop character falls out. So I think that might be, just my own opinion here. That might be why the whole triple IPA trend isn't really around anymore, is that people realize you make and by triple IPA, we're just take double IPA and add more booze to it, more hops to it. It really does start to get not that good, in my opinion. Imperial IPA, I've heard people refer to it as Imperial IPA as well. I feel like people are just riffing on a trend, and we're kind of past that now. But I get where you're coming from, Justin. If it's an American Strong Ale and somebody serves it to me, usually if it's fresh, I could stomach it. I'm fine with it. But in my mind, I'm thinking, give this a few more months. It's probably going to taste better. At that point, I don't think it would qualify as an IPA because the hops would have fallen out. So that is everything that we have so far from patrons. I am going to imagine that more people will respond to the question on Patreon. If you, didn't get yours read, please, it wasn't that we were actively ignoring you. It's that I recorded this episode ahead of time and your comment came in after that. Real quick, I want to do an overview of all of the styles that we'll talk about the top 3 styles here that are the most hated by, at least by patrons and contributors of Brülosophy. So number 1 was actually shared by 4 different styles. 5 people said that they hated these 4 styles the most: smoked beer, hazy IPA, wheat beer, and under that, I'm including just that as a general category, which would include American wheat beer, Weiss beer, Hefeweizen, stuff like that, only because people weren't too good at delineating what type of wheat beer they're talking about. So the 4th one would be sour beer, which blows my mind. So you've got one of the most popular beer styles in the world right now, hazy IPA, is among the most hated for our patrons and contributors of Brülosophy. And then smoked beer, that one makes sense to me in part because I'm in that club, and I did not count myself among these. So if I were to, the only one of those top 4 that I would add one to is smoked beer, which technically makes it the winner of the most hated beer style that we discussed today on the show. Number 2, with 4 votes, we'll say, is stronger beers like barley wine, American strong ale, stuff like that. One person also kind of mentioned rye wine. I dropped that because we talked about it as barley wine, but so strong beers. And then number 3, coming in last place, but last place in a last place competition here, is milkshake IPA specifically, which is so interesting to me. That isn't even a style that has crossed my mind in years. The last time I had, what somebody referred to as a milkshake IPA, I think was 4 years ago, and it was a homebrew. It wasn't, I don't even know if any of our local breweries make what is technically referred to as milkshake IPA, but clearly not the most loved style of beer, at least among our patrons and contributors. Another 3 people said Belgian ale, and another 3 said pastry beer, which I'm going to go ahead. If you clump those with, pastry beer with milkshake IPA, I think that makes sense. So it's really kind of that sweeter, overly fruity, like actual fruit added to the beer style of beers. People just don't seem to be the biggest fans of that. Here's the thing. For every person who said they hate it, there's somebody out there who loves it. And I think we need to appreciate that. The 4th place that came in with 2 votes was non-alcoholic beer, and then Saison, Calcommon, Keller beer, American lager, Gosa, Belgian IPA, and barrel-aged beer all had 1 vote. So that is all the time that we've got for this episode. I agree, hate is a strong word, and while I feel it's perfectly appropriate to use in certain contexts, which we'll just leave that there, I understand others disagree, but this is just beer. We're only here to have a good time. Humongous thanks to all of our patrons for sharing their most loathed beer styles for this show. If you'd like the opportunity to be included in episodes like this in the future, please consider helping us out by becoming a patron of Brülosophy over at patreon.com/Brülosophy. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, The Brülosophy Show, at youtube.com/@The Brülosophy Show. That is the @ symbol followed by The Brülosophy Show, no umlaut needed. And make sure to head to Brülosophy.com to stay current on all of the fun beer and brewing stuff we are up to. The Brülosophy podcast is made possible by the generous support of our sponsors as well as all of our rad listeners. We seriously could not do this without you. Cheers to everyone who has subscribed and left a review of our show. It makes a huge difference. If you haven't yet, please consider doing so. Head over to Brülosophy.com/support to view a list of ways you can easily help us to continue producing this podcast. If you want a reward for your support, visit Patreon.com/Brülosophy. Thanks again for listening. We'll be back next week with another episode of the Brülosophy podcast. Until then, think beer.
Start off the morning with some hot tea, lemon and honey cause it suits my bro. Put some herb in the bowl, yeah, it's homegrown. Ain't gotta go through them.